everybody, Chris from CK Cycles here. Well, it's a big day for the XT500. Pretty much the bike is fully assembled, everything except the skid plate. I'll get that on a little bit later after I get the bike running and get it tuned and whatnot. And so I'm at this stage where I'm going to be attempting the first startup of the engine. And when I get to this stage with the bike, I like to move it off kind of my restoration table here and get it on an actual service lift. That way I can, lift the bike up to work on it, set it down, roll the bike off, go do what I have to do, put the bike back on the lift, and lift it up. And I'm not constantly having to lift it onto my table and whatnot. So I'm going to start out this episode with transferring the bike off of the restoration table and onto the lift, the service lift, and then we are going to attempt a first start of this engine. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing to this bike to kind of get it primed and in preparation for that first start. So let's head over and I'll show you how I get this off my restoration table and onto the service lift. I kind of don't like to leave bikes up in the air if I don't have to. All right, there we go. Okay, so I poured in about half a gallon of rec fuel. I don't want any ethanol going through this bike. Hooked up the battery. I have a screwdriver if I need to make any carb adjustments real quick. I have an 8mm wrench so that I can tighten up the oil filter bleeder screw and some paper towel. I want oil puking out of that thing, and then I'll tighten it up. So I am going to watch my little window there and do my best to start it, and we'll see what happens. So we should have fuel. Fuel line is full. No leaks. We'll put it on choke. We'll give a couple extra turns to the idle adjustment. I'm just looking for fuel leaks. It is on run. Actually, I'm going to turn it off. I'm just going to give it just a few kicks. Kind of prime it, I guess. I don't know. Hopefully not flooding it. Okay, still no fuel. All right, let's send it. kick. Just let it run. I'm going to check for oil. Oh, we got oil. Come on, baby, get back in there. I don't know if you can see the oil on the ground. It's going to be smoky for a while. That's okay. I'm just going to let it run. Get up to 10. And then I'm going to check the oil level. Oops, you didn't like that. Okay, so I think I'll pause the first start video right there because it was at that moment that the bike died. You know, it started up on the second kick, was running pretty good, was getting warmed. I flipped it off choke and it died. And I had a heck of a time figuring out how to get it restarted again. From that moment on, I kicked and I kicked and I kicked and I kicked and I kicked. I just couldn't get it restarted. I let the bike fully cool down all the way, I mean like cold, hopped on it and turned everything on, started right up again, first or second kick on choke, you know. So I decided to start looking into some things. You know, the first thing I thought of, well, it only runs on choke, it doesn't run off choke, it must be super lean. It must be running super lean. But when I pulled the spark plug out, the spark plug was super sooty black and dry. And I mean sooty, not just a little dark. It was like caked sooty, which tells me it's running extremely rich. And so I thought, well, first thing I'm going to check is my float bolt, was my float height in the bowl. You know, so I checked, double checked, even triple checked my float height, still got the same result. You know, when the bike is cold, I kick it, starts first, second kick on choke, no problem at all. Once it gets up to temp, or if I try and give it some throttle, it'll run real poorly. If I turn the choke off, it'll die, so I have to keep the throttle wide open, and it runs extremely poorly. And a hot start was never possible. And whenever I would check the plug, fully sooty, black, caked, bad. And so then I just started going through everything. I took the carburetor off, cleaned the carburetor. I started out with a number 30 pilot jet and a 220 main jet. Oh, and I have to say at this point, I think in my last video, I was talking about my 1T1 carb that I obtained for this bike, and I thought that the 1T1 was off a 76, and the carb that came on my bike, my 77, was a 1T2. Well, one of my viewers said, no, Chris, the 1T1 carb is actually off a 77 TT. And so as I was digging through my manuals and digging through parts diagrams online, just to double check and verify I was running the correct pilot jet, you know, I discovered, yep, that 1T1 carb is off a 77 TT. But regardless, I had a number 30 jet, pilot jet in there, which I think was the stock jet on that carb. And I went from, I had a number 25 pilot, so I leaned it out. And I think I went up to, I think like about a number 35 pilot, made it real rich, 220 main to 240 main. Still had the same problem. Cold start great on choke, warms up, it dies, off choke, it dies, carb or the spark plug sooty black. You know, I even checked the pin or the clip position on the needle, which I know the needle I think only comes in at higher RPM, so it shouldn't have really impacted what I was doing. The air adjustment screw, you know, was the air mixture screw had absolutely no effect all the way in, or all, I mean, pull that screw out, still did the same thing. I went through timing, I'd start the bike cold and would run it on choke. It would idle great, smoothly. I checked the timing with a timing light and I was spot on with timing. Checked my valve lash again, checked my cam chain tensioner again. I mean, I ran it with the air filter out, with the air filter in. Took my petcock apart and made sure I wasn't having any sort of obstructed fuel flow. And I finally started to think, well, maybe what's going on here is that I'm having a hot spark issue, Once the engine gets running and the engine gets warm, maybe I'm starting to lose spark or get weak spark. And I still had the original ignition system on this bike. I'd put in a new set of points and a new condenser and even a new spark plug coil, and I thought, well, what's left in the ignition system? I bypassed the kill switch on the handlebars. I bypassed the keyed switch, just in case there was some wiring jiggling that was going to ground or something while the bike was running and got warm, causing spark issue, and so I thought, well, maybe it is my ignition source coil. This bike has two coils, ignition source coil and then another coil on the front of a plate under the flywheel, and that front coil is your lighting and charging source coil. And there's a dedicated source coil for the ignition, and I was reading up on them, and I mean, these things go bad, sure, not very often, I heard, but I guess that it is possible. I tried to take some resistance readings off this thing, and I just couldn't get any good readings off of it. So what I did is I went out and I bought an electronic ignition kit, an ignition only kit, and I'll probably do a video on installing that ignition only kit and adding my original source or my original lighting coil to that kit and then on the bike. So anyways, put on electronic ignition kit. So I had gone through, I had fuel, my ignition system was brand new, and it was electronic ignition, CDI box, the whole deal. Oh, it's an awesome kit. I did a compression check. The engine was kind of warm. It wasn't up to full temp, but it was warm. I put my compression tester in there, and I tell you what, kicking past the compression stroke on this bike is not a fun thing. So it wasn't like I put the tester in there and I was like, boom, 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 and you watch the needle go up, as you pump. You put it in there and you find the compression stroke, and then you push hard, and it's like, oh, okay, click, 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 click. Ouch, that hurt. You know what I mean? And you saw the needle go boom, boom, boom. And I got it up to just below, I think, 140 PSI, 135, 140 PSI. And I thought for, not an engine that's not fully up to temp, probably that compression is probably fine. This bike should run, So spark was good. Compression was good. I knew I had fuel getting delivered to the carb. It never overflowed. It never leaked, anything like that. And I was at a loss. So I said, okay, I was pretty discouraged at this time. I didn't film any of it. I just wanted to get the bike running. This was spread out, over a few days because I had to wait for my ignition kit to come in and things like that. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take the carburetor apart one last time. I talked to a buddy of mine, and a couple buddies of mine, and they said, it's got to be carburation, man. You've checked everything else. Something's up with that carb. So I said, okay, I'm going to take the carb apart one last time. So I fully disassembled the carburetor, verifying the jets that were in there. I went back to the original air screw. I went back to the original choke plunger. They were in good shape. And I was looking at the carburetor, and I looked at the carburetor. I looked down the venturi where you see the slide, and the little needle sticking down. And I was looking, and it didn't look right. And I looked at the carb that came on the bike down the venturi, and I saw the slide and the needle. But sitting in the venturi, you know, up above the lower venturi wall was a small tube, you know, a main nozzle. And that's what the needle, you know, slides into. And that the main nozzle, I think, is almost a venturi itself. You know, so that when you pull the throttle, the slide comes up, the needle comes out of that main nozzle, you know, and then goes back in, and you know, helps to meter the fuel coming in, I guess. The main nozzle wasn't there. And so I went back and I got my baggie out with all my carb kit parts from my carb that I disassembled and this carb that I disassembled, and I saw that I had two main nozzles in that baggie. One was the older one, which was kind of dirty, and one was brand new from the carb kit. So when I took that carb apart and cleaned it, I did not verify that I reinstalled the main nozzle back in that carburetor. And, you know, and I was kind of like beating my head against the wall, like, how could you have missed this? You know, this is pretty basic stuff. You take a carb apart, you put it back together, you verify all the parts are there, you know. And so, needless to say, I reassembled the carburetor with stock air screw, stock choke plunger, stock number 30 pilot jet, number 220 main jet, and made sure that I installed the main nozzle. And this is the result. Okay, so main nozzle reinstalled in the carburetor back on the bike, and this is the result. Gotta let it warm up a little. Idling off choke, no problem. And so there you go. There you have it. And the bike starts right up, cold, warm, hot. It runs good, runs, you know, you run it on choke till it's warm, flip it off choke. You know, I've been able to adjust the air screw to get down to a nice smooth idle, you know, with the idle screw. And man, it's just running great. So there you go. That's the story of the first start of my XT500. And this restoration is nearly complete. I think I'm going to wrap this video up for now. It might be getting kind of long. But I think I'm going to come back with one more video, kind of a recap of my experience rebuilding this 77 XT500. You know, I do have one last piece of restoration that I want to do on this bike. We'll get to that in the final video, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about what's next here at the CK Cycles channel. So, all right, everybody, have a good day. Bye-bye.